Good afternoon. As we gather today, after celebrating Easter and Passover, I'm pleased we can begin this season in conversation with our City Council members on issues of concern to all of us, no matter our faith or background. Congratulations to Kevin De León, Nithya Raman, and Mark Ridley-Thomas on their most recent elections. As the Chief Program Officer at the Federation, let me share a few words about how we are the bedrock of this community 365 days a year. We have built a model where we respond to the needs of our community and support the most vulnerable. Our job has stayed the same during the pandemic. We identified and addressed the greatest challenges and created opportunities to meet those challenges. We pivoted quickly and dramatically expanded our work, responding to our already and newly at-risk vulnerable populations. We launched new programs to provide food to community members, including young adults who could not afford to buy groceries. We switched to meal deliveries, care packages, and increased in-home care services for seniors, which my colleague will talk about in a moment. To address the overwhelming number of requests for emergency funding for help from those who have never previously asked, we expanded our financial assistance programs and established a new program providing interest-free emergency education and business loans for individuals and families coping with dire financial circumstances. We increased the number of social workers to meet the escalating needs for crisis assistance and increased the counseling available to combat the devastating mental health toll across our community, from teens to young adults to the newly vulnerable. For our own community, we built new grant programs to keep Jewish preschool education affordable for families who lost employment and to ensure our Jewish institutions could reopen safely and in compliance with COVID-19 protocols. We also helped our partners access government funding opportunities. To do all this, we amended our plan quickly so that we could respond in the most strategic manner possible, working intensely with our network of partners. Unfortunately, the extensive needs of our community are not disappearing. In fact, we are seeing needs emerge, new needs emerge. We expect that the impact of the pandemic will be felt for a long time, and the Jewish Federation will continue to lead and convene with passion, purpose, and in partnership. One of our key partners is Jewish Family Service, and I am pleased to turn our opening remarks over to Eli Weitzer, the CEO of JFS.
Thank you, Becky. On behalf of Jewish Family Service LA, it is my pleasure to be part of today's program. We are pleased to work in partnership with the Federation today and throughout the year, responding to the community and advocating on behalf of children, families, and seniors in need. Jewish Family Service LA has been a part of the fabric of Los Angeles for more than 165 years. For those of you who may be less familiar with JFS, each year our comprehensive family of services improves the quality of life for tens of thousands of people throughout Los Angeles, regardless of age, economic status, religion, ethnicity, or gender identity. JFS operates 3 domestic violence shelters. We deliver comprehensive senior services in the community and through 5 senior centers. We address hunger through our SOBA community food and resource centers and our home delivered meals program. We provide counseling, case management, and mental health services through programs across Los Angeles County. JFS partners with multiple city and county departments, as well as with the California Departments of Aging, Healthcare Services, and the Office of Emergency Services. We are excited about today's discussion with Council Members De León, Raman, and Ridley-Thomas. Welcome. To guide the conversation today, we are fortunate to be joined by Libby Denkmann, Senior Politics Reporter at KPCC. Libby joined KPCC in 2016 after serving as an anchor and a reporter on KFI AM. She strives to cut through the jargon and provide a roadmap for navigating our democratic process. She is a graduate of the University of Washington's Jackson School of International Studies. Welcome, Libby. Thank you all for joining us today. And thanks to everyone who worked to make this program possible. Libby?
Thank you so much for the warm introduction. And I just want to dive right in because our panel is so excellent today. Councilmember Mark Ridley-Thomas represents the 10th district on the Los Angeles City Council. That's an area that spans Central and South Los Angeles, including parts of Koreatown, Leimert Park, Baldwin Hills, and Crenshaw. Nithya Raman represents the 4th district on the council. That district includes Los Feliz, Larchmont, Hancock Park, and parts of Koreatown, Hollywood, and Sherman Oaks. And Kevin De León is also here. He represents the 14th district on the council, including parts of downtown, LA, Boyle Heights, El Sereno, and all the way up to Eagle Rock. So welcome to all of our panelists. And if anybody on the call has any questions for the panel, you can use the Q&A function at the bottom of the screen to weigh in, and I will try to get to questions. We do have limited time with our panel, so I'll do my best. So to start out, I just want to start with a bit of an icebreaker. We have 3 freshmen city council members with us tonight. In the case of Councilmember Ridley-Thomas, it's a super freshman. And I just want to ask, what is your vision for city government? And how are you working as a new member on the council to create a more responsive city hall? And let's start out with Councilmember Raman on that question, and then we'll go De León and Ridley-Thomas following that.
Well, just wanted to start off by thanking the Jewish Federation and Libby for having me today and for moderating this conversation. Libby, it's a pleasure to see you again, albeit digitally. And thank you to both my fellow council members also for joining me. Looking forward to the day when we can all actually share physical space again and do it more regularly.
Be careful what you pray for.
You know, I feel very I feel particularly new even among the new council members, given the incredible expertise that my colleagues on this panel bring to the council, including previous time in the council on the part of Mark, and so much government experience for both of you. But for me, you know, I think my vision of government, my vision of city government really came from the reason why I wanted to run at this moment in LA history, which was that I'm an urban planner by training. I did a lot of work around volunteering on homelessness in my own neighborhood. I was on my neighborhood council. And one of the things I saw in my own neighborhood and in the response to homelessness that I saw in my own neighborhood and the response to a lot of issues that I saw around me and the issues that I cared about in the city was that our city had control over a lot of things and played a role in a lot of things that shaped the world around me, that shaped the ability of residents around me to be able to access resources and have their needs met. And yet, for the most part, people didn't know a lot about city government at all. Most of my friends did not know who their city council person was before I started running. And, you know, when we were door knocking, which we did extensively during the first part of the campaign, most people whose doors we knocked on didn't know their city council person either. The only person they knew at the city level was their mayor. And in a city where council has an incredible amount of control relative to the mayor, just because of the way our city structure is set up, and in a city where there's only 15 council members and so many constituents per council district, it felt to me like a moment where having more residents in the city be aware of their council, be aware of what their council could do for them, could actually push our council to do some of the things that I thought they could have been taking action on for a number of years, particularly in serving vulnerable residents and serving people who are renters, who make up the majority of LA, but who didn't vote in as great numbers as homeowners did. And so we had policies coming out of city council that I thought didn't reflect the needs of residents that I saw around me, and kind of the most intense needs that I saw around me. And so in many ways, my vision of what I wanted to accomplish in City Hall, and we're really trying to work on that now, is to try and make a council office that was responsive to many more constituents, to a much broader swath of constituents and residents in our district than I had seen happen in the past. We did that through the campaign by doing extensive outreach. You know, I was in a council district that had about 24,000 people who voted in the previous council election. And in this past election, 130,000 people voted. A huge increase that was driven both by the change in timings of the election, which moved to coincide with federal elections, but also because of a big outreach campaign that we did during the campaign. And now in office, what we're trying to do is to find the space to continue to do that outreach, to make sure that we are reaching out to neighborhoods, to constituencies, and to constituents who may not be aware that they can lean on the council for support, that they should turn to us for help. And I feel like if we can rebuild our council office to be responsive to the needs of all constituents, that we can build a Los Angeles that is ultimately fairer, and where every resident can really find a place to thrive.
I think that evolution of the, engagement that's been going on, especially during the pandemic, and then also the turnout in the municipal elections compared to previous municipal elections is just the story of, Los Angeles politics right now. And it's really fascinating. I want to open the floor now to Councilmember De León to talk about his vision, and Councilmember De León, how you are working to make Los Angeles City Hall more responsive.
Well, thank you very much, Libby. And I want to thank the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles for hosting tonight's town hall, and for giving me, as well as my colleagues, Councilmember Mark Ridley-Thomas, as well as Nithya Raman, the opportunity to share our thoughts on city governance. And Becky and Eli, thank you very much for your incredible comments. I also want to thank the Federation for all of the civic engagement that you do year-round. I think your work and the mission helps to strengthen all the communities throughout LA because you highlight the critical issues that at the end of the day affect all of us. Fundamentally, while we may come from different rich cultural backgrounds, we're all connected as individuals and as communities. And I think that your work during these challenging times cannot be more important. As we know, what we've been experiencing, what we've witnessed during the past few years is tremendous efforts to create social divisions, divisions that try to convince us that we can't agree, that we can't find common ground, or that we can't create mutually beneficial solutions to problems that we confront every day. And those divisions have been accompanied with enormous spikes in hate groups, not just nationwide, but in our own backyard in California and in LA. And we've seen spikes of anti-Semitism, not just in the US, but as well as abroad. As we all know, back in 2017, the entire nation witnessed the abhorrent manifestation of anti-Semitism of the Alt-Rights Unite rally in Charlottesville. And we saw hundreds of marchers with swastika flags that threw Nazi salutes and chanted Sieg Heil, and Jews will not replace us. A year later, we were horrified by the mass shootings that took place at the Tree of Life congregation on Shabbat. Morning services where 11 people were killed and 6 were wounded. And, it doesn't take a scholar to figure out the comparison to the soulless shooting at the Emmanuel AME Church in South Carolina by a predominantly African-American congregation. The tragic murders of George Floyd, Breonna Taylor, Stephon Clark, and countless others, women and men of color. And in my own community, where we've been pained by the vilification of Latinos and Latino immigrants seeking refuge and from torture, from human trafficking. So seeing children caged and sleeping on cement, concrete, floors. So this is, I think, an inflection point in our nation, in our city's history, unlike anything we ever experienced before, because we have the great generation that experienced World War II, experienced for those, the Holocaust, for those survivors who are still with us today, for those because of Executive Order 9066, the internment of our Japanese American community, the largest population in the United States here in Southern California. For those baby boomers, they experienced what shaped their lives with the Vietnam War, as well as Nixon and Watergate. For me, Generation X, for me, what had a huge impact on me was Proposition 187. But today in 2020, 2021, with regards to the global pandemic, whether you're from the great generation, whether you are baby boomer, Generation X, a millennial, or Z. What ties us together is this global pandemic and how it's exposed the raw, ugly side of the economic and racial schisms that truly still exist, even more so today, especially in a great, diverse, wealthy city like Los Angeles, where we're confronting the issues of climate change, where we're confronting the issues of the greatest humanitarian crisis of our lifetime, which is the issue of homelessness, where we have, easily over 41,000 housed, sheltered, and unhoused individuals, family members, mothers with loved ones and children living on our streets, our alleyways, our parks, our RVs every single night in one of the wealthiest cities in the entire world. So confronting these challenges and me coming from state government and acclimating myself and engaging with wonderful colleagues like Nithya and MRT and other colleagues on the city council, 15 in total, and engaging with a charter system, as Nithya just mentioned, bestows a tremendous amount of power individually in council members. It's a double-edged sword because you have a tremendous amount of power to do good things, and it's a double-edged sword because you have a tremendous amount of power, not to do so many good things as well too. So with that amount of power comes great responsibility to shape, the most diverse city in America. And the last thing I want to say about the issue with regards to leadership, because I think sometimes a lot of folks confuse the issue of leadership, often they conflate it with being an elected official or a politician, whether you're a council member, state senator, US senator, governor, mayor, etc. Leadership, it manifests itself in many different ways. You can be a public school teacher. You can be an executive director of a nonprofit agency. You can be a business leader. You can be a community leader, an activist. Leadership is born from the different strands that make that rope very tight, that strengthen our community members. Just because you're an elected official, just because you're a politician with a certain amount of power doesn't make you a leader. And that's how, during this moment of crisis, how we exercise that leadership and demonstrate the courage of our convictions to move the policies that improve the human condition for all individuals, regardless of who you are, and regardless of where you come from, the color of your skin, as well as your legal status. We'll speak to the type of city that we want to live in, the districts that we represent individually. And I think that, again, in 2021, we've gone through many very difficult times, but this is clearly one of the most difficult times we'll ever face in our lifetimes because of the global pandemic. It has exposed us so greatly. So this is a very momentous time to be in office, to hold power, and to hopefully demonstrate the leadership that the city, the state needs.
Thanks, Councilmember De León. And my radio instincts are kicking in. I'm just looking at the clock. I know we don't have a ton of time with everybody. So if we can try to get the answers just a little bit closer to like 2 minutes or so, that would be excellent. Councilmember
Message, Libby. I got the message.
With all due respect, Councilmember Ridley-Thomas, your vision for city government and also how you're thinking about your second round as a freshman member.
We thank you for the opportunity to share this evening, and shout out to the Jewish Federation. Props to Libby for your work and the way in which you do your work. I'll be as succinct as I can possibly be, which is nothing less than 15 minutes to clear my throat, and then we'll go from there. I think the test of leadership in this hour will ultimately be measured by who leans in, who doubles down, who captures the imagination of the populace with respect to the defining moral crisis that confronts this city day in and day out. You might say 41,000 reasons day in and day out, and that is the crisis of homelessness. If I'm to be judged in any way as to what's important to my tenure on the city council, it has to be how much time how much energy, how much capacity will be leveraged in the interest of the dignity and well-being of those who are yet homeless, and to help better appreciate the collaboration that has to take place between the city and the county of Los Angeles. I think there is no higher calling at this moment in time. And let me just make it clear, this is not a moral crisis alone. It is a fiscal crisis. Anybody who's under the mistaken impression that homelessness, that is the status quo as we know it, is without significant cost, I would want to urge them to think again. And so we really do have our work cut out for us. It just so happens that the 3 new members of the City Council serve on the Homelessness and Poverty Committee. We are seeking to roll up our sleeves and to make a difference. And I think we are obliged to do so. And so I will just conclude by saying most of my work is defined in the image of what we can do to make good on our commitment to our respective stakeholders, neighborhood council, faith leaders, business leaders, labor leaders, the whole range of stakeholders, the media, the nonprofit network, philanthropic entities, name them as we will, to cause Los Angeles to distinguish itself among major cities in the nation as the way in which we have addressed this crisis with dignity, with purpose, the kind of intentionality that is results oriented. I'll leave it at that for the time being.
Thank you, Council Member. And that really segues into a topic that I wanted to get to with everybody here. The city recently closed Echo Park Lake for renovations, and in the process cleared a homeless encampment on the north side of the park. LASA tells me that more than 180 people were placed in temporary shelter there. A small number of tent residents did not accept Project Room Key for various reasons or other shelter options. And an untold number ended up fleeing when there was a police action to shut down many streets around the park. The mayor and some other city officials say that the operation was a success because of this housing effort. And, there's talk about potentially duplicating it in other parts of the city. Activists argue that it was a heavy-handed police-led action and that it set back service providers' work. We'll start this one with Councilmember De León. What is your view of how this operation at Echo Park Lake was conducted? What kind of lessons can we draw from it? And is it a model for other parks or other encampments across the city?
Well, thank you, Libby, for the question. I think that, clearly, each council member has his or her right to forward with the projects, the programs that they wish, but I think the presence of law enforcement clearly left a lot of folks traumatized in many ways. I think that there's always an opportunity if you're going to provide housing, whether it's permanent housing, whether it's temporary housing, non-congregate, whether it's program room key, that we can continue to engage, we can continue to outreach, but without a law enforcement LAPD presence. Unfortunately, that was the case, obviously, that evening in Echo Park. I know that for me personally, for example, today I was in El Sereno in Huntington Drive doing personal outreach myself with an encampment that I have on a medium on Huntington Drive. I was going tent to tent and personally engaging with folks who are also doing vaccinations as well simultaneously. We closed escrow on 2 hotels on Huntington Drive on sworn in December 4th.
Get off.
We closed escrow on December 29th, and we're in the process of outreach to move folks. I think gaining their trust, engagement is really critical. You don't want to traumatize folks. I think the model, there's a lot of folks who have been quite successful in their own respective districts throughout the city of LA, moving folks towards shelter. Again, whether it's non-congregate shelter or into permanent housing. And they should look throughout the city to see the different types of models that have been working.
And Councilmember Ridley-Thomas, can you go ahead and take up that issue of what happened at Echo Park Lake and what kind of lessons we learned and if it's a model for the rest of the city?
I think it's a mixed report at best, Libby. I have no need to second guess anyone's work and how they chose to lead. I simply would assert the following. As it relates to the 10th Council District, it seems to me the strength of alleviating the homeless crisis therein is to do so through a clinically based, health-informed, trauma-informed model that I know can ultimately be effective. Let me just simply say to you, Kaiser West Los Angeles, that Venice and David is a concrete illustration of how the people concerned, the nonprofit provider, moved there and did the work that needed to be done. Adjacent to the COVID-19 recently remodeled facility where an encampment had been established, we moved there with a similar set of tools. I think we need to invest in a model that is multidisciplinary in its approach, with street engagement teams that do this work and do it well. There are no easy solutions, no silver bullets. I simply say that the display of force by way of law enforcement is very costly, and the results that are derived from that may prove to be more problematic than not, depending on the circumstances. And so I would be very, very, very reluctant to use the language of this being a model. All of us know that there are appropriate roles for law enforcement in engagement, typically when there are acts of violence that take place. And frankly, there are such acts in some instances. They happen to be the exception rather than the rule. Therefore, it seems to me that law enforcement presence ought to follow suit, exception rather than the rule. And so I believe that we have a lot of work to do, but we need to be prudent stewards of our resources. And I think there are smart ways to do that. And I think there are ways that we do it that are not as cost effective as they should be. And so I'll conclude by saying the capital that we expend, financial and moral, we need to attend to with great care. And I would like to be a part of conversations that think about advancing mediators, advancing interventionists, rather than sworn personnel who are holstered in the case of addressing a crisis that is of a social nature in and of itself, rather than a criminal nature in and of itself. Peter Edelman wrote a text that many of us should make our way to. It's not a crime to be poor. And to the extent that there's no crime engaged here, then it seems to me we have to put in place the proper resources. Law enforcement officers are not fans of confronting homeless encampments. They're not trained to do it, they know it, and they are doing nothing more than following instructions, that is to say, higher orders. But if we had options, which we ought to be exercising, I think we could speak the language of what kind of models that would ultimately make sense. More to come on that.
Thank you, Councilmember. And Councilmember Raman, on Echo Park Lake and the action there to clear the park, and also what kind of lessons we can draw from that.
Yeah, you asked Libby whether I thought this was a model for the rest of Los Angeles. And, I think I was dismayed by the size of the law enforcement presence that we saw there, and expressed some of that while it was happening. And I guess I would just say, I would echo some of Councilmember Ridley-Thomas's remarks here in terms of the role of law enforcement in homelessness, and think about what we can learn from the history of Los Angeles as a whole, and what it means for models that we're putting into place here in this city going forward. I think what we have seen here in LA over the last, not just recent few decades, but really almost throughout the entire history of Los Angeles, is that we have had a lot of people experiencing homelessness here in LA. And almost the entire time in that history, the major investment that the city has made in responding to that homelessness crisis has been to invest in law enforcement and policing and incarceration. In fact, the first major expansion of the city's jail system in the early 1900s happened in response to a rise of people living on Skid Row. We saw that, in response to a sharp rise in homelessness in the 1980s under Mayor Tom Bradley, when we again invested in sweeps and incarceration. And we saw that over and over again. In fact, this has been the way that LA City has always responded to this issue. And this particular moment in Los Angeles is so unique. It is so unique in part because of Mark Ridley-Thomas's work. And so I just want to thank him for that. Because of Measure H and because of Prop HHH at the city. This is the first time that in LA, we have had significant dollars invested in non-law enforcement approaches to homelessness. And this is the first time that we've had the kinds of resources that we've needed to actually take on this crisis. But we don't have enough, and we just got started. We literally just got started on this effort. I mean, it's been 2 years. And so what I see around me and what I see as the lessons right now that I'm taking, because of the messages that are coming into my council office, because of the questions that I'm asked in public forums, is that I see a city that is grappling with impatience. I see a city that sees money being put into homelessness and doesn't see a commensurate improvement on our streets. And I understand that frustration. I do. I really do. At the same time, I think what we need to do is to respond to this moment with an awareness of the context in which we are operating and a doubling down of the resources that we need to be spending on this, to put more into services, to put more into housing, and to expand the work that we're doing, and to really make it possible for us at the city level to respond to this with the things that actually end homelessness, not just move people around from encampment to jail and back, or from encampment to freeway to park to street. It's just, this is what we have been doing forever, and it hasn't worked. It's never worked. And now we have an opportunity to do something that can really end the crisis, end the experience of being homelessness, actually put someone into housing. And that is the opportunity that we have ahead of us. And I think as a city, as a community, what we need to be saying is, let us have patience, let us have grace, and let us push forward to spend more and to do more, and to make sure that we're putting into place the resources to have the kinds of resources that we need to actually take on the crisis at the scale that it needs to be taken. I'm in council now. This is obviously my first time in government, and I'm held responsible for homelessness in my district. And right now, in this moment, what I do with a lot of my time is to call other people and try and get more resources for my district, so I can get services out to people, so that I can get outreach teams out to people, so that I can get mental health services out to people, so that I can find places to get affordable housing. I don't have anything of what I need. I need 10 mental health teams. I have none that are assigned to my district. None, not one. Full-time assigned to the hardest hit districts, neighborhoods in my district. I don't have it. And that is the model that we need to be building, that resource-rich model where we know we can do better than what we have done in Los Angeles. That's what I want to be building towards. That's the lesson, I want to be learning right now. That's the lesson I want to share with people. And to everyone who asks me, how can I help on this issue? What can I do? I think what I say is advocate for more, have that patience, have that grace, and work with your council office to try and make things better.
I know we have limited time. Councilmember Raman has a previous engagement. She has to get going in a few minutes. So let's get through this next question relatively quickly, if we can, just about 90 seconds for everybody for an answer. But related to the issue of Echo Park Lake, I mean, it's the story of being an elected official. You have these competing interest groups. You're hearing different things from different stakeholders. There are groups in Echo Park who said, clear the park immediately tomorrow, get this done. They wanted the encampment gone. And there are people who said that the encampment should have been able to stay and be in the space that it was in because of the CDC guidelines and, all these different recommendations for how to treat a homeless encampment, especially during the pandemic. I know that we're not here to second guess an individual council member, but I want you to address broadly, when you have these competing coalitions that you're listening to, you're trying to balance the needs of your district. How do you navigate something like that? And Councilmember Ridley-Thomas, it's a big question, but if we can start with you.
It's the business of leadership. It's not prescriptive. It's often organic, but it needs to be authentic. And there's a level of accountability and transparency that ought to define what leadership looks like. And so what I have said and will say, and I'll make it specific to Echo Park, but it shouldn't be limited to Echo Park. They need serious mediators, conflict resolver, conflict resolvers, dispute resolvers in droves in that space to help move through that process. There's an Office of Dispute Resolution in the City Attorney's Office in Los Angeles. The county funds them. The Asian Pacific Legal Clinic has one. There are many in the space, and we just ought to shift the paradigm as effectively as we can and cause those who are in disputes to understand it doesn't have to stay there. It doesn't have to be a matter of combat. It could be a matter of resolution. And frankly, we find in such instances that there are points of give and take on both sides. But I can tell you without fear of contradiction, these are matters that have to be taken seriously, and we cannot get up from the table until we've made substantial progress. But the progress that we need is the ability for people to deal with each other fair and square. The progress that we need is to recognize that we will have to make a substantial investment and a reinvestment in the amelioration of these conditions. And there is no way around that. And so I simply want to make the point that it is critically important that in Leimert Park, in Echo Park, in Exposition Park, along Berindo, north and south, which Councilmember Raman and I share, there has to be an engagement unlike what we've seen before. On Skid Row, what Councilmember De León had, there has to be a different dynamic put in place. And until that happens, we will not make the progress that we deserve to make. And we cannot call ourselves the City of Angels unless we do so. I feel very, very strongly about that. And I know that there's a path forward and we ought to embrace it.
Councilmember De León, your take on navigating these constituencies, these voices that you're hearing from all sides when it comes to issues like homelessness.
Libby, let me say this. We don't live in a world of absolutes. So it's not either or. They're compatible. The City of Angels our constituents are beyond impatient with regards to the gargantuan crisis that is homelessness. I want to put this in context for each and every one of you, because just in City 14 alone, and I always say this, City 14 is not a microcosm, it is the microcosm for the city of Los Angeles. I have more unhoused individuals in City 14 than any other city council district in the city of Los Angeles. In fact, I have more unhoused individuals in City 14 than the entire unhoused communities of Pittsburgh, Baltimore, Miami, Washington, D.C., Cleveland, Newark, Cincinnati, Chicago. Yes, the third largest city in America, Chicago, Houston, San Diego, Sacramento, Oakland, San Jose. That puts it in context of the magnitude of the crisis. But let me sort of kind of cut to the chase as well too, because if we're going to resolve this issue, it is about housing. That's why we use the word homeless. That's why we use the word unhoused, because there's not a roof over their head. Now, historically, as Nithya had made reference to, Skid Row has been the containment geographical area. One of my colleagues, Gil Cedillo, call it apartheid, because the vast majority of those living in Skid Row are men of color, women of color, primarily African-American and Latinos. So this has become a crisis, a visceral crisis reaction for the rest of the city, whether you live in Chatsworth or Porter Ranch or Woodland Hills or down in San Pedro or elsewhere, because now it's gone beyond Skid Row, Echo Park, Silver Lake, elsewhere. And now it's become a gargantuan crisis. What was historically contained, geographically, highly segregated in one area, which is Skid Row. And that's why if we're going to deal with this crisis, it is about housing. So the critics out there who say we can't build ourselves out of this crisis, there's no other choice, because either you're going to build at a price point that brings value to deal with the volume. And I've criticized openly HHH. I don't think it's been a success, quite frankly, because you can't spend $750,000 per unit on unhoused, individuals when you have a family who can't purchase a 2-bedroom, 2-bathroom, 5,000 square foot lot for $750,000, contingent on how much they can put on a down payment, how much they can pay on the PMI monthly mortgage, as well as their FICO score. So it's not sustainable. But that's not the fault of our unhoused community members. That is the fault of government at every level, in the US, federal, state, county, as well as city governments. So whether it is building prefabricated modular housing on government property to eliminate land costs and reduce dramatically the soft costs, mechanical engineering, architectural design, lawyers, consultants, because this is taxpayer dollars ultimately at the end of the day. Moreover, masters, leasing, scattered site approach. That means housing throughout the city of LA, throughout the region. This is doable. This is within reach. Lastly, let me just say this one thing to me. Listen, with the issue of mental illnesses, schizophrenia, bipolarness, unless there's a pharmaceutical company that's going to come up with a pill that eliminates it altogether, so we're not on the spectrum, or the issue of illicit drug use, addictions, and consumption, because we have FBI, DEA, ATF, LAPD, LA County Sheriffs, every law enforcement interagency task force known to man and woman, but they have yet to curtail the large flows of drugs coming to the north. But what is within our power at the local level, executive as well as legislative branch, and the general managers of the departments, is the issue of housing. That is within our control. And we see
Councilmember, I just have to get Nithya Raman wrapped up. Sorry to interrupt.
All right, I'm sorry, Nithya.
No worries. She's got to run. So we are just going to, I just wanted to open the floor to you, Nithya, for your final thoughts, especially considering we're talking with the Jewish Federation. Obviously, the Jewish community is very diverse. Oftentimes poverty and issues of homelessness in the Jewish community can be overlooked. Is there anything you want to wrap up on, especially, when it comes to making sure your staff members are aware of these issues and addressing the concerns of the Jewish community in Los Angeles? And I know you got to go, so it's going to be brief, but I appreciate the time.
I think you've asked some really great questions tonight, Libby, and I've really benefited from hearing from Mark and Kevin. Thank you so much for your wisdom, and thank you to the Jewish Federation for having me today. I just wanted to say, you asked about listening earlier, and you asked about how you bring, respond to different voices and different communities. And you also asked about how we make sure that we're listening and reaching out to the Jewish community, which has an incredible amount of diversity within it as well. And I think the very honest answer I have for you for both of those questions is that I'm still learning. And I'm looking forward to working with different constituents to make sure that their voices are being heard. And I think one of the challenges of this moment, because of the broader political moment that we're in, because of the uprising around the murder of George Floyd, because of the political kind of travails under Trump, I feel like this is a moment where there's not a lot of trust between residents and with government. And I think that makes it a lot harder to navigate these bigger questions around how do you really hear people, and how do you really make sure that you're responding to people, and make sure that you are treating every concern with the respect that it deserves. And all I can say is that I don't know the answer to that, but we are sure as hell trying in our office. And to the Jewish Federation, we are looking to you and to so many other Jewish organizations within Los Angeles and leaders to make sure that we are able to address the needs of Jewish residents in Los Angeles, as well as all of the other residents in our district. So thank you so much, Libby. Thank you to both of you for both Mark and Kevin for your incredible wisdom, and to this panel for having me. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Councilmember Raman. Nithya Raman again represents the 4th District, which includes Sherman Oaks, Los Feliz, down to Koreatown. I really appreciate your time. And Councilmember De León, since I so rudely interrupted you, I just wanted you to pick up there. And, we're talking, of course, to the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles, and the Jewish community is such a diverse community. As I said, this is a community that's often overlooked as well. Unfortunately, like all Angelenos, there are issues of poverty and homelessness in the Jewish community as well. How do you ensure that your staff is responsive to the Jewish community in Los Angeles, and that these issues, are being addressed by your office?
Let me say, Libby, contrary to pernicious stereotypes, there are a lot of folks, in our Jewish American community, particularly senior citizens, who do live at poverty levels. Listen, when the collapse of the former Soviet Union, and we had a huge diaspora of Ashkenazi Jews, coming from the former Soviet Union and other Eastern European countries, coming to America, coming to California, coming to Los Angeles, West Hollywood, you saw a lot of folks who were dependent on government services, and they needed the government services to survive, whether it was housing, whether it was food. So we do have a lot of, whether you're Ashkenazi, whether you're Sephardic, a lot of senior citizens who struggle every single day, to make ends meet, to keep that roof over their head, to put food on the table. So, it's my commitment to all senior citizens, regardless of who you are, again, regardless of which God you pray to, regardless of your country of origin or the language you speak, that we have a commitment. Let me say this, that in the United States, we do have a culture where, quite frankly, I believe, we sort of kind of throw away our senior citizens. These are our mothers. These are the women in particular, and single women who raised us, who fed us, who protected us, who worked their fingers to the bone, only to retire deep into poverty with no defined benefit program, and have very limited means to survive, other than perhaps a Social Security check. And we know that Social Security check on a monthly basis won't suffice to pay for the rent, the food, for your medication. And that's where I think government at each level has to step in to provide the dignity and respect that our senior citizens, but especially senior citizens' mothers deserve. So you have my commitment. That commitment has always been there. It's always been strong to all of our senior citizens, but in particular, to your point, sort of to demystify, if you will, the pernicious stereotype, within the Jewish American community. Yes, we do have, that's the big secret, or not such a big secret. But we do have, Jewish American senior citizens in particular, who are poor and struggle every day. So they are part of our collective struggle to make sure that everyone can live a life with dignity and respect.
And Councilmember Ridley-Thomas, your take on your office being responsive to all communities, and particularly the Jewish American community in Los Angeles, which, as we spoke about, also contains folks who are struggling and who have issues of homelessness and poverty that they face. Oh, just unmuting there, council member. Our first one of the panel. This is a record for me to go this long into the panel without an unmute situation.
Yes, and I take note of the fact that I was the one who was involuntarily muted. I'll try to figure out what that was about later, Kevin. You're working your program over here. I simply want to say that for the arc of my career that predates my being an elected official, when I was the executive director of the Southern Christian Leadership Conference, founded by Martin Luther King Jr., ours was an interfaith dialogue with board members who represented major houses of worship from the Jewish tradition. And I have maintained that over time, even to the current conversation. No stranger to this conversation, and continue to try to learn. Have represented parts of the Jewish community in various stations of public life, from the Board of Supervisors back to the State Senate and even the State Assembly. Currently on the City Council, portions of the Jewish community. And so I seek to foster understanding and input among respective communities, because diversity is the asset of the city of Los Angeles. And when I speak the language of diversity, it means that all of us have an obligation to better engage each other. And so we can emphasize diversity, but always in the context of commonality. And to that extent, I think we have a number of things that bind us, the right to housing being principal among them. And any stereotypes that people may harbor, we should reject out of hand. The right to housing should be broadly applied, speaking to the issue of prevention, speaking to interim solutions, speaking to permanent housing options, and street engagement. I'm speaking the language of houselessness now, because all of us have a stake in that. Reference was made earlier to the background, but I put on the table that I'm trained as an ethicist. And at one point in time, spent a substantial amount of time in the area of theological ethics. When Dean Weissel was at Hebrew Union College, I was there trying to figure things out. Even spent some time at the Immaculate Heart College on the interfaith dialogue. But there is a scripture from, prophet by the name of Micah that I am guided by. And it goes as follows: what doth the Lord require of thee? It is to act justly, to love mercy, and to walk humbly with your God. It seems to me that's at the heart of Jewish life. It is at the heart of what animates the sense of our obligation as human beings to each other. And I wake up each day with that informing my consciousness, not just from a philosophical perspective, but from a very practical perspective. And if there is nothing else that can be attributed to my own sense of direction, just know that is very prominent.
Thank you, council member. And thank you to the panel. I know that you have a lot of obligations on your time, a lot of things to take care of when you are dealing with the city's business and as freshmen members of the council. And I really appreciate the time that you have taken to share with us and Jewish Family Services and the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles. Councilman Mark Ridley-Thomas and Councilman Kevin De León, thank you very much, both of you, for joining us. And Councilmember Nithya Raman was also here earlier. And thank you to the Jewish Federation of Greater Los Angeles and Jewish Family Service for the panel today. And I hope everybody has a great evening.